So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Alexandra Johnson. We are so grateful that you're here to share your insight. So Alex completed her graduate legal and business degrees from St. Louis University in 2003, and her law practice focuses on estate planning here in St. Louis. She's very active in her community and is the immediate past president of the Hispanic Bar Association. She is passionate about diversity and inclusion, which we're about to find out. And I'm so thrilled that you agreed to share your insight today. Personally, I've known Alex for, I'm not sure how many years, but years. And I called you earlier this year to discuss something completely unrelated to today. And we went down this rabbit hole and just started this conversation. And now you're here presenting for us. So I'm very excited to listen and learn. And I'll hand it over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. I know that, gosh, there are a ton of CLE options. And so I'm really glad that you're here. I appreciate you having chosen my presentation. So I am going to go ahead and do the slightly awkward, it's always at the beginning here, of sharing my screen. And it'll take a quick second, and then we'll go ahead and start that slideshow. And so it is definitely a great pleasure to make this presentation happen in various groups. It varies from group to group. When I am giving it to people who are not attorneys, it's obviously a little bit different. And it's actually quite different. We focus mostly on estate planning education and those strategies. I have been asked for this presentation not to assume a lot of knowledge, but of course, you know, critical race theory is its own field of study. You can get a PhD in it, you can write books in it, and you would not necessarily be able to cover everything. There's just no way to cover everything actually in an hour. So if this stuff is, you know, if we're talking about things that are maybe par for the course for you, you live in it day in, day out, it's your lived experience, or maybe you are a specialist in this area, then please be patient with the rest of us as we cover some of these basics. And certainly feel free to add any comments in the Q&A that you think would help move the group along. And we'll also reserve that for estate planning tips and strategies. We have 90 minutes today. I asked that because it's just so hard to cover everything in 50 minutes. So the bottom line is what we're talking about here is a mindset. To just jump right in, it's not necessarily that as attorneys, practitioners, or CPAs, we have a very nice group of big law and small law here. I think I saw some maybe Monique from the courts and so forth. So we have a very nice group of people, but we're not going to necessarily write laws. Like this CLE isn't for legislators. So as we're practicing, we are probably going to use mechanisms in estate planning that are already in place. And the point is to have the mindset that brings you to think about these things throughout the course of your representation, throughout the course of working with your coworkers and your staff at your office. And you just can't ever stop learning. What I want to impress upon the group and in this conversation and emphasize is that this is par for the course as attorneys. The benefit, you know, there might be other professions that might struggle with this a little bit and have difficulties in different ways. But the bottom line is that in our profession, we are used to having to provide competent representation. If a new law gets decided, a criminal case gets decided, or an immigration case, if that's our area, or if we're tax attorneys, whatever our area, new regs come out, new cases come out all the time. And we have to maintain that competence. And with Missouri's rather robust, I had the opportunity to work with the Missouri Bar. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end on a diversity committee. And we ended up having to take a look at what other states were doing. We wanted to get an idea to gauge the temperature of what other states are doing. And come to find out that Missouri actually has this great Rule 1505 that requires the cultural competency, diversity, inclusion, and implicit bias training. And when you combine that with our other rules about competent representation and maintaining that competence, which we do in every other area, that indicates that in order to provide proper legal representation to our clients, we are going to have to maintain competence in this area. And it's not just 1 hour a year. That competence needs to thread through, obviously, as I said, our entire representation of the clients. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. Jennifer was kind enough in the intro to mention some of these things, but my goal here, excuse me, my goal is not to, to talk about myself per se, but to ask you to focus as you're hearing me talk about my cycle of socialization. So each one of us has that. From the beginning, we are taught one thing or another by our parents, by the environment in which we're raised, and those priorities and values. I'm sorry.
While Alex takes a break, I just launched a poll. If you could please answer it. Thank you.
Well, I'm obviously very sorry about that coughing attack that I had here. Let's see, we have about half of us in the office. Thank you for throwing that poll up, Jennifer. I appreciate the save. So the situation is that I'd like you to talk about or to hear a little bit of the cycle of socialization. And with the idea of tracking your own socialization. So I'm born. Where were you born? I was born here in St. Louis. I was raised in a very Catholic environment. I was able to go to travel a great deal when I was younger. And this obviously informed my views on a lot of different things. When I was in Hong Kong getting my master's in international business, which I got at the same time as my JD, I ended up finding out that through the dean of students that a class of mine had been canceled. And I needed to stay on schedule. And so I asked Dana Underwood, for those of you that went to SLU, you'll recognize her name. Maybe if you went through those years, she was a wonderful support for those years of law school. And I said, find me an hour, a 2-hour class, because that's what I was missing. And I wanted to stay on track with my 2 programs. Find me a class that works. And so I landed quite by accident in critical race theory. She was kind enough to take care of that while I was doing a master's in international business class in Hong Kong, as I said. And that was my first adult experience with critical race theory. Now, I had been raised in this social justice Jesuit Catholicism, so it dovetailed right away with that previous experience. And that's where I first started learning about it as an adult and in a more structured fashion. 25 years ago, give or take. I'd have to think about the years. So then I am pursuing these degrees. I'd also already studied in Mexico, studied in France, studied in Germany. As I said, I've gotten some additional training and different work experiences, as you can see on the screen. And through all of that, training and professional experience and a lived experience, kind of gotten to a point where it's something that I think about on a regular basis. So diversity and inclusion, I'd like to think is a priority, but it's almost kind of in a background programming. Now, when we're thinking about our psychosocialization, of course, we have to adopt a permanent growth mindset. Like this is, again, with that, those professional regulations of learning and maintaining our competence, maintaining our knowledge that we're required to for professionalism. You know, one of the things recently, I love the acronym by POC, use it all the time. And a couple of months ago, read an article that was suggested by another friend that said, hey, there might be some problems with this acronym. And the big thing is that the language evolves. You know, English, ye old English is not, you know, French evolved, like French from 2 or 3 or 5 centuries ago is not the same as it is today. All language evolves, all language scientific advances. There's a permanent growth mindset here. And the issue with using an acronym for Black, Indigenous, people of color is, of course, for example, people of color, well, if you are of Asian heritage or you are of Latinx heritage, that would technically put you under the rubric of people of color, but that's a radically different experience. The same way an Indigenous experience or a Black experience in this country versus being in Africa, that may not be at all, obviously, the same experience. So those lived experiences can get kind of glommed together or lumped together, and that's actually not a good use of that acronym. But for expediency's sake, in a conversation where you are wanting to talk about non-BIPOC, people of Northern European heritage, usually lighter skin color, versus BIPOC, it might be useful in that way. So that's, you know, that's something that comes up in different conversations, and not everybody defines themselves or uses the same language. In the Latinx community, I try to identify usually as Latinx because there's a big conversation about homophobia that needs to happen, and that is happening. So by using the X at the end, some people prefer Latine, some people prefer Latina or Latino, depending on their own gender, if that's significant to their identity, and other people prefer Hispanic. There's criticism of that term being a colonized term. Similarly, in other groups, AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander, Black versus African American. So there are a variety of constant conversations. And this is the point. This is a permanent growth mindset, and it has to be viewed as a living thing, just as we would view tax regulations. We would never expect any particular non-BIPOC individual to represent all non-BIPOCs. So why would we turn to anybody who is Black, Indigenous, or people of color, or a person of color, and say, you're speaking for all Asians across the planet? We would never do that for any other group. So we shouldn't do it in this context either. Another learning experience was colorism versus racism. So a friend of mine is in New York. She's of Haitian heritage, and actually speaks multiple languages, including Spanish. She was at a Latina friend's house who, when her little boy was playing with the friend's boy, they went into the other room, and her Latina friend said, "Guarda tu dinero." She called out to her son, "Put your money away." And of course, the thought was, why would you tell your son to put his money away when my kid went to play in that room? And the words she used were gut punch, physical blow. This was very hurtful. I was like, give me her name right now. I'm going to call her right now. You know, I'm calling this woman. I don't know who she is. Of course, I did not get that number because that's not the kind of person my friend is. But microaggressions, I think, is actually, in terms of evolving language in this area, I think it's terrible. You know, there are people that remember 40 years later that their gym teacher said this, or their physics teacher said that, or homeroom teacher, or an adult, an uncle, or another friend. You know, you got teased in a certain way, and so technically it would be a microaggression, but they're not micro at all. Excuse me again for whatever's going on with my throat here. So as you think about this cycle of socialization, and I just kind of demoed it with my own. You can Google these cycles of socialization and come up with different graphics. I particularly like this one, and I'll tell you why. Because as you're evaluating, I like these thought prompts. You know, what was the privilege that I was born with? There are very few of us that have exactly zero privilege. Truthfully, most of us have, for example, if we're talking about diversity in the context of LGBTQI plus, if we're cis het, that's a layer of privilege. Those are layers of privilege, right? And intersectionality is where those meet, those identities meet and cannot be separated. So you look at these thought prompts, and then what were the policies that favored your families being allowed to remain intact? We have, of course, in the last few years, heard a lot in the news about family separation at the border. There's also the school to prison pipeline that can separate families in some ways. We have federal policies with regard to housing. Pruitt-Igoe, P-R-U-I-T-T, IGOE, I-G-O-E, is something you may be familiar with here in St. Louis. And that is a public housing. And there were policies. I met an architect who is now in his late 60s. When he was quite young, 4 or 5, growing up in Pruitt-Igoe, his dad was downsized through no fault of his own, lost his work, and they didn't allow an able-bodied male to stay in the housing. So his dad, who they didn't have other family members or people that could stay with here in St. Louis, had to leave. They separated the family, and he had to leave to go, I believe it was Michigan, and it took years for him to be able to come back. And then in the meantime, his mom, who did have some work, ended up with a childcare problem. And so, you know, from a logical perspective, obviously that creates difficulties. But what he was conveying in that presentation on Pruitt-Igoe that I attended, where he was sharing his thoughts afterwards, you know, his dad had gotten taken away, right? So was your family allowed to stay together or not? Did the federal policies support and benefit your family or not? What have your own difficult experiences have been? And as you learn more, do better, you know, you repeat to create the new cycle. And as I was saying, you can Google this and come up with a lot of different cycles of socialization. I particularly like this one because not all of them do this. They just create a round cycle. But this one actually talks about, it creates another arrow. So you actually break out of this cycle and you create a new cycle. Change, raise consciousness, interrupt, educate, take a stand, question, and reframe. And I would submit that's what we're doing here right now when we're talking about cultural competence, and then later in the context specifically of estate planning. So you want to make sure that you are providing an environment where your clients can speak out, and I'll come back to you. You'll hear this again in the presentation because it's really important. I used to have long hair. I now have my COVID haircut, very, very short and easy hair. But what is I like to ask, what is the hair culture in your space, in your workspace? Can people who have hair, I was always jealous of my Latina cousins that had that beautiful, glossy, thick, curly hair. And, you know, I don't have anything like that. But are they able to wear their hair there? Are women of African heritage, men of African heritage? Is this professionalism, what we call professionalism or consider professionalism, actually a form of maintaining cultural hegemony in the dominant culture, which is non-BIPOC? So are BIPOC people, whether they be staff, clients, visitors, the notary, if you have a notary come in from time to time, if you don't have one in your office, are the people interacting with your professional environment actually comfortable being themselves? And you want that and need that for your competent representation. Because if you have a client that can't tell you everything that's going on, whether it's racial or, again, LGBTQI plus, or it's an immigration issue, if you have a landlord-tenant matter, if those are domestic violence, I mean, you need to create an environment where people can speak up, right? And show this. So, knowing your client in this way, creating this environment that they can speak, can allow you to make that, advise them better in terms of, just as an example, charitable giving. We'll talk about that more in the strategies later. What focus should the charity have or not? How is that nonprofit structured and staffed? If your client has certain priorities and the underlying issues in how the nonprofit world is, the industry, if you will, is structured and how it operates, then you may or may not be offering the same competent advice that you would if you did know those. Informal conflict resolution in a family disagreement. There are very different cultural values. When we're working with Alaris here, mediation could be resolution of a criminal case, could be an estate planning case. When you have, for example, family relationships where in an estate matter, it's an example that I give. Maybe a family member says, hey, I'll move in and take care of mom or take care of dad, because that's what some cultures do with the elderly members of their family. They don't place them in nursing homes. They don't bring in outside help. It's a very important value. In Indian culture, for example, that's a huge component. In Latin American culture, that's a huge component, that you take care of your elderly and don't put them into a nursing home. Well, if you're coming at it from cultural perspective where that's not, and I'm a Latina, and I help take care of my mom twice a week. And so, right here in St. Louis. So it's just because you aren't practicing in Brazil doesn't mean it's not relevant right here. And what you want to be able to do is, if you're coming at this from a perspective of your own culture, whatever that culture may be, and you're wholly unaware of these other cultural dynamics, well, what can happen? They may not tell you something that's important. You may overlook some issues. You may also miss potential solutions. So when you're talking about mediation, when you're talking about arbitration and other things, you want to be aware of those, because gosh, you could never ask the question that might actually lead to a solution. And maybe they don't feel comfortable because you haven't created the environment accidentally. I mean, I'm not saying this is intentional, but there's not an environment where they feel, or maybe they don't realize you don't know. Like, they don't realize that your plan is, man, as soon as mom hits 70, maybe your mom, that's her plan. That's her aging plan, that your mom actually is like, I just want to go to an assisted living and leave me alone. I want to be independent and with other people. I don't want the family thing. But that's where knowing what these cultural values may be and being familiar with them may allow you to engage in informal conflict resolution that moves the situation forward on behalf of your clients in a favorable way. So we've talked a little bit about the implicit bias, or we're going to talk rather about implicit bias and the systemic issues. Now, Jennifer, a quick question. You said that we have not shared this presentation, that's correct, but I did send you a case, an article that I'll be talking about in the presentation. Was that shared with the group?
Yes, so it was actually a link they would have clicked on when they got their notification, the reminder yesterday, 24 hours in advance. So hopefully people saw that.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll be talking about it a little bit, but I just wanted to know if they had it. All right, perfect. Thanks so much. So this is definitely a safe space, I'd like to think, and we will have a little bit of extra time. I want you to pay attention, though, if you're feeling a little bit of resistance. So going back to cycle of socialization, what's my hair environment? What's the culture? Is this a hegemonious culture? Or is it more accepting of other definitions of what professionalism is? And internally, are you feeling any resistance? Jot it down. Nobody's going to see you. This is Zoom. So just say, you know, like I really was a little uncomfortable when she talked about, I'll be covering white saviorism, white privilege, you know, jot it down. If you just heard it right now, you heard those words and you're like, oh my gosh, she's going to cover what? Jot it down and Google that and sit with that. Figure out where you are with that. And then see if there's some growth in there. And that's totally okay. Going back to the very first slide, the famous words, when you know better, do better. So just keep that in mind. So implicit bias, this is such a rich area of exploration for all of us. You know, there was a graphic that I saw, a meme, and I couldn't find it, but I was like, oh shoot, I should have saved that for my presentation. And if I had a chance, I would have incorporated an article that I just saw this morning on something else. This is definitely a living experience and something that's ongoing. But the graphic that I'm talking about, or the meme that I'm talking about, had an iceberg. And, you know, the water, we all know the tip of the iceberg, that's where the saying comes from. And it's the tip of the iceberg, the racism that's caught on the cell phone, right? You have the little tip of the iceberg, that's the racism that's caught on a cell phone that we have documented. And underneath the water, invisible, is this mass, just a mass. We know other research tells us that I'm giving this presentation obviously in a very aware fashion, and you are either listening or maybe multitasking, because that happens too. But you're participating more or less right now in an aware way, right, with whatever you're doing. But so much of our behavior is actually unconscious. And that way with implicit bias is the exact same case. So let's look at a very basic explanation. We have the two types of bias that are implicit and unconscious. We have, of course, conscious, and the news and the cell phone videos and all of that focus our attention rightfully on some of the things that are very, very wrong happening in the world and get caught on camera, whether it's a citizen saying something inappropriate. I was thinking of a couple of different words there, inappropriate to somebody else at a park or something that they have no business even talking to that other person. Or it's, of course, in the area of police abuse of force and other examples, employers and so forth. So we see that kind of conscious stuff coming forth and being expressed, but there's also this implicit bias that's really the bulk of informing the bulk of our actions and our society, I would submit. So it's a very rich area of exploration. Harvard offers great tools for this exploration. They've got all these different tests. You can do them, they're free. I personally have been, and I keep saying this, and I'm going to have to challenge myself because I keep saying that I want to look at the disability one. My mom, due to some strokes, mentioned very close family relationship, due to a series of small strokes in December of 2018, was put into a wheelchair basically by the effect of the strokes. And I had been sandwich generation, hands up for anybody who's in the middle of two generations. We'd been at my kid's school for 2 or 3 years at the time. And when that happened with my mom, I had to call our school and ask if we had wheelchair access. Is that not terrible? I told you I landed in critical race theory back when I was in law school in Hong Kong. I'd been studying it and working with various groups, but my ableism is definitely an area of growth. And because I am mobile, it wasn't until my mom became immobile that my family, my life was directly affected, that I even identified this as an area of growth. And that was 2 or 3 years ago. I will say that I have worked on it, but one of the things I want to do is schedule a bit of time to do the disability one. You can look through these lists, and there are a ton of other resources, but this is a great one that a lot of people use to find themselves. Why do you want to learn this? Besides competent representation? Well, it's everywhere, right? I issue a challenge on this slide to every group I speak to. It started a couple, 3 presentations ago, find me, Google anything, racism hair, racism education, racism housing, racism creditors, racism, any aspect of our society that you put racism plus and any other term, find me one that here in our country is not impacted in any way by racism, where either you find no search results or it's really some kind of magically immune area of promotions or science or any of food justice, it just doesn't matter. But find me that and I will donate $100 to a mutually agreed upon charity. I issue that challenge. Nobody's ever come back with it because as we know that it's not, not likely to happen, but I issue that challenge and I'm doing it again to this group. You find me something and we will agree on a charity and donate it. Not affected by racism at all, because you can Google anything. And I would encourage you, if you're an expert in this area, you're in the audience and you're waiting for the estate planning portion, that's okay. You already know what I'm talking about. If this is something that's kind of new to you, then I would encourage you to, the next time you're on hold or the next time you're at the grocery store, or put it on your calendar. I'm going to Google this for an hour and learn about any area in our society and try to beat Alex at that challenge and learn about whatever you might be interested in. So let's go to estate planning, right? We've given that bit of context and it'll be interwoven. It's not like, hard stop here about the diversity. But as we move into estate planning, because that's also the subject of this presentation, we have to look at systemic issues, right? That's how our society is structured. We have a criminal justice system, a housing system, a banking system. Within the banking system, we have lending. These are all systems that interact with each other. And I don't find that a particularly controversial thought process, because I look out of the window here in my office and I know I didn't build this. There's a code system. Somebody put in the roads, somebody put in the electric, there's plumbing, all these, back in the Roman days, they had aqueducts. Well, now we have, sewers and whatnot. I didn't put any of that in. So of course there's interlocking systems, right, throughout our society. It's not controversial in any way. Although it has become politicized, but it's not actually intellectually or conceptually controversial. So look at the asset acquisition, right? We know that in estate planning, what we are talking about, for the most part, is what's going to happen with your assets if you have experienced a period of infirmity prior to your death. You have your power of attorney. Who can get a reverse mortgage on my house to pay for my care? How is that going to happen? If I have a business, I saw a lot of solos on here. What's your business succession planning, and so forth. So that acquisition, preservation, and transfer is what we're going to be looking at and how it's impacted by systems. Now, a great article. Oh, looks like we have a poll here coming up. How would you rate your planning? Oh, I'm interested in this. I want to know. Shoot, I can't vote. Okay, I can't vote on this, but I definitely want to know where the group is.
I'm going to leave it up for about a minute if that's okay, and then I'll put the results out, okay?
That sounds great.
I didn't let you vote. Sorry, I figured you'd probably be the 5-star webinar.
I'm hoping it's a 5-star webinar.
Oh, I forgot to say it was 5 out of 10. I'm just kidding. All right, Alex, I'm going to end it and I will share the results.
Let's see. So let me see if I can get a screenshot of that. So no experience, 7%, very little, 45. So over half of us have very little estate planning experience. Took it in law school, very knowledgeable, 14. Okay, so that 14% doesn't look like anybody feels like they could really give a 5-star webinar. But for that 14% that feels very knowledgeable in this area, I'm going to ask you as we're going through this, if you have ideas, throw those into the chat or the Q&A and say, this is how I think this would, what would be a great solution for this. So one of the things, for example, is a spousal refusal of letters. Well, that's a relatively, in today's dollars, a low amount of money. We won't talk about that too much, but that might be something that practitioners say, that's where I think we could really make a difference for people, right? You know, whatever your ideas are for that 14%, and for anybody else, if you have something that you read or something, feel free to share it. Definitely a groupthink format if we can get it. So let's talk about this Strand article that I like so much. Now, I don't agree entirely with it. It is from 2010, so the conversation, for example, on reparations has moved on. She does talk about race-neutral policies. There's obviously a huge debate as to whether race neutrality is even possible or even desirable, right? When we are talking about equality, that's one thing, and we will be talking about that more in a bit. And when we're talking about equity, that's entirely different. However, the reason why I still use this article in my presentation is because I love the structure. I love how she structured this. When we're learning about systemic issues in estate planning, it's really important to understand that you know, when we're talking about asset acquisition, asset preservation, asset transfer, everything that we do for you on this call individually to get your own affairs in order, that's going to have an impact on your family or not. You know, Jennifer was telling me just before this presentation that as arbitrators, they're seeing more and more probate cases, you know, having to get mediated, having to get resolved. So that's something that you will have. And I put that's intentional personalization, because I want you to think about if it's true for yourself and your family, it's got to be true for everybody else. And it is. And these are systemic issues. When you inherit inequality, when you don't get your paperwork in order and that house is lost, not foreclosure, that's a different kind of loss, but it's lost for abandonment reasons, that nobody picks it up, right? And then the city has to repossess. Legal Services of Eastern Missouri has a great program on this. They're actually developing it and pushing on it, and I'll be working with them soon on that front as well. That, you know, it's a huge problem in the city of St. Louis, but it's a huge problem across the nation. So if you are watching this presentation from these other states, I bet you if you are in Arkansas and in Kansas, you can find definite areas where abandonment of property for lack of what often happens, this is what happens in a lot of cases, the grandmother or grandfather, the uncle, whoever dies, and nobody knows where the paperwork is. They don't know to look into it, or they're not interested, or they're not in that state. They're somewhere else. They've moved away, or whatever the circumstances. And then over time, those property taxes don't get paid. And sometimes what happens is people find out and they're like, hey, you know, it's been a couple of years since grandma died. Let's look into that. Or 3 or 4 years or whatever, depending on what your locality allows for how long those property taxes aren't paid before they are seized, before the property is seized. Then by that time, the tax bill may be so high that nobody can pay it. Nobody can pay that lump sum. And depending on the rules, a lump sum may be required. And so the house is effectively abandoned. It, you know, goes through its process at the municipal level or depending on the state. But then that family, that wealth may go back into the taxpayers' wealth, but it is out of the family, right? It doesn't go. My very first car was a hand-me-down from my sister when I was a teenager. It was a tiny little Ford Escort, a gray Ford Escort. I now own 3 cars, and our house doesn't have a mortgage on it. And those are things that would not have happened, but for all of that little bit snowballing, every little bit helps. So this structure in the article helps us look at how the systems help that or don't help that. Down here, when she talks about changes of inheritance law, if you're interested in this area, I would recommend you looking at that. Inheritance, in a way, is a windfall, right? Like, I didn't do anything to get my sister to be nice to me. Well, I mean, we had a good relationship, but I didn't do anything in terms of earning that free hand-me-down from her. She just got a new car and she was kind to her little sister. And maybe that goes back to parenting and upbringing and so forth, but it was a windfall to me. Intestacy is a real issue, and we'll talk about that. I was mentioning the importance of housing. I want to emphasize that in this. In many instances, for those who lie between the top 20% and the bottom 20% of wealth, the principal residence is between 1/2 and 2/3 of the total net worth. Half and 2/3, half and 2/3. So as you're hearing this, if I can hear one, of that 14% that is experienced in estate planning, if you can pro bono, or we'll talk about that, other ways, save a house, you are, with one family, you will be making a tremendous difference. There's just no question about it. If we can do this as a society, we will make a tremendous difference. And we know the way housing works. It goes into property taxes, which goes into education, which goes into life potential and health status and all so forth, and everything, right? The bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, food, clothing, shelter, obviously all affected by housing. So this is a tremendous area. We have, as attorneys, I would submit, look at the laws, right? There were laws that were written at times that people of African heritage were slaves and could not vote. People could own property or not. Today, we see laws that are, not to get too political, but some would say favoring voter enfranchisement and others disfavoring voter enfranchisement, right? Those are all laws. We're the architects of society. And take a look at society and tell me you don't think we need to roll up our sleeves here and get to work, right? There's a lot going on that needs help. And specifically estate planners, because of the systemic inequity, like I said, that cycle of socialization, if you think about the economic cycle, the redlining, the green lining, the lending, the education, and how that fits into health and stress and all of that, well, that's one cycle. But if we save one house, if we can help, and maybe they don't have a house, maybe it's a few $1,000s in assets that, hey, if they knew about that spousal refusal of letters, they could do it that way and save themselves a bunch of money. What if we do a non-probate transfer? Missouri is great for that, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But estate planners, we have our hand on the levers of this, right? We have, I would submit that no area of law is unimportant, but as estate planners and probate administrators, we really, really can make a difference because it's so foundational. Housing is so foundational. So what are the solutions? What are the things that we can do? What can we start talking about? And I'm hoping that 14% that you'll be chiming in here. I don't know if I can see when I'm sharing my screen like this, but afterwards I will definitely get to a good stopping point and we'll look at what you guys have been putting in the chat. We have the non-probate transfers. Not all states have them. The other thing is our procedures here in Missouri are fantastically simple. What happens when you have a TOD on a car? What happens when you have a POD rather, on a bank account? If you have a beneficiary deed in place for that house, is there some kind of massive convoluted procedural mess, mayhem? No. Actually, where did I have to do some work last year? I think it was Colorado. And I'm like, really, there's a TOD on this car. Like, it shouldn't be this difficult. I don't want to diss Colorado. It may not have been Colorado, but we have people from Arkansas and Kansas here. Missouri, our TODs are very simple. You present a death certificate, you retitle the car, bada bing, bada boom. In most cases, it's quite easy. And that is a real advantage when you don't have a lot of assets and you don't want to pay an attorney to do a lot of work, because, I mean, unless it's a fancy car, the legal work may end up, could end up being worth more than the car, or almost taking a really big chunk out of that asset, that particular asset. So we talked about the funding process a little bit earlier, and I want to come back to that and emphasize it again as a theme in the presentation. So when we're talking about shifting this mindset towards an equitable basis, a more just society, we have to look where we are inadvertently perpetuating the same dynamics. So I hosted a conversation on reparations a few months ago. And one of the comments, we had a couple of speakers, and I'm happy to tell her name. It's not in any way private. She posts this on Facebook. So Erica Williams of A Red Circle is the nonprofit. I actually served on that board of directors. You may remember from an earlier slide, and have been involved as best I'm able. It's a fantastic organization from the community. Erica was born in North County. She is raising her family there, doing a wonderful job in this nonprofit. After Ferguson was asking, after Mike Brown's death, was asking herself, what does my community need? And one of the issues that happens with the funding mindset when we have the nonprofit world and we look at how that works is that I do believe it's unintentional in many cases, or in most cases. There's a perpetuation of the dynamics. You have non-BIPOC leading nonprofits, and there's either very little paid staff of color, or the culture is very non-BIPOC focused. It's not led by people who are in the community. And so what ends up happening is you have nonprofits who are coming up, who are trying to do work, who have connections, who have roots, who are working in the community in an ample and rich way. And they're having to compete with non-BIPOC who aren't from the community, maybe well-intentioned. And that's where that white saviorism that I was mentioning earlier comes in. And again, if you feel a little resistance to that, that's okay. That's okay. Jot it down, Google it. Maybe that's a little bit of an area of growth. So we have to look at how these grants are given, to whom, why are they given? Is there anybody within the community already doing this work? And if that is the case, should I interject myself and form, I think Missouri has something like 35,000 or so registered nonprofits. Well, gosh, if I'm going to be 35,001 and I'm going into a space where there's somebody already else doing it, am I reinventing the wheel? Am I perpetuating those dynamics? Am I using my privilege in a way that is effectively harmful? So we want to look at those. That's really important in the area of like advising your clients as to charitable giving and so forth. So tying into the permanent growth mindset, this equality versus equity, and what I was saying that Strand's article needs to be updated a little bit. She talks about race neutrality and stuff, but the structure of her analysis is really good in my opinion, because it allows you to fit in new information like Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist book, and Heather Fleming is a local resource, a great book from her. And it allows you to fit that into a framework, which we as attorneys kind of like, truthfully, like we like to have our analysis, our legal memos or our briefs or our motions, they go in a certain order, and that's perfectly okay. That's actually a skill and a benefit for what I think our society needs. So this graphic I have used for years. I've seen it for years, but hey, it turns out that there are some problems with that. And again, another friend, and you find, just like if you're really into football, you make sports friends. If you're really into knitting, you make knitting friends. If you're really into this, you'll see that friends are like, hey, did you see this article? Or they'll post it and you're like, oh, that's a good point. Like I got to click on this and find out. So there's some criticism, and I think it's really valid. If you look at the different figures, so here's equality. And the idea is, you put the boxes up, the different boxes. If it's just one box here, then the shorter, the yellow figure is still not going to be able to see. So the idea of equity is you put 3 boxes, but there's still some problems with that. So this author goes on, and I'm just inviting you to think about this. You'll see it's like, hey, maybe we should actually be focused on removing the barriers. Why are we accepting implicitly in the equality or equity discussion, or the one box or three discussion, the presence of the barriers? Why are we accepting that premise? We should be removing the barriers, right? Um, and that's more justice. And this is, I love this last slide, and I wouldn't be surprised if in a year I check back and this author has actually written something else. And then as we look at the equality, the equity, the liberation, we've removed the barriers. So whether in all your beauty, you are shorter or taller, you can see the game. There are less barriers. But the best part of this, and she writes about this, is your idea here, because this is evolving. And I hope you're hearing this, because I'm really trying to emphasize it in this presentation that I've been giving to lawyers left and right and non-lawyers left and right. This is, we may come to find out it's an ongoing thing. And in the quest, it's a quest for a more just society as we decolonize. That's what we're talking about. As we're moving towards decolonization, what wheat do we cull from the chaff, and how do we move forward, right? And that's where all of our ideas can come in together. So your primary resource is going to be your listening through this process. Now, when I say listening, I'm talking about the listening that I've got on the screen, but I'm also talking about what I've been saying. Google this, jot down anything that you've been feeling resistance, or if, and this is an example, I mentioned my ableism that I'm working on. I'm owning it. If you hear me saying that, my ableism, that's not a slip of the tongue, that's intentional, because it's us, right? Our due diligence is our own. Obviously we can work with colleagues, or maybe we have a draft of a previous will or something that we're going to use. But ultimately, especially in the law, the professional competence, the buck stops with us, right? And so that's something that I have to take ownership of and work on. When I'm listening, you have to listen to yourself and hear that resistance. A few years ago, I'm going to say 7, 8, 9 years ago, I don't remember, when noticing I'm very much an advocate for LGBTQI plus rights. Actually, there are additional acronyms added now to emphasize other experiences as well. And I realized that I actually was feeling some resistance when I was reading or hearing and maybe seeing something on social media or something that had related to trans rights. And I was like, what is that? Well, in me, right? What is that in me? Why am I? So your listening is going to be to you as well. And doing some research into that, come to find out that actually the binary, male, female binary, is a colonized thought process, is a colonized value. Many indigenous people, if you look at the ancient peoples of the world, gender fluidity was common. Think of the Druids in the Celtic tradition, in Ireland. Indigenous people here in North America had multiple genders. I think the highest number I want to say that had been found was 7 or 8 genders, so not just 2. And not just 3 non-binary, but 7 or 8 people on the spectrum, and not only accepted, certainly not just tolerated, but I believe in parts of Asia, and maybe even Native America. Don't quote me. We can look that up. We can Google it. But there are parts of the world where non-binary people, gender fluid people, were actually venerated, so not killed. Trans kids here are at risk terribly of suicide because of the discrimination, and also death by murder in our culture. It's terrible. It's terrible what happens. These are human beings. No matter what, the basis is humanity, right? And so, when you're looking at that, well, looping back, so you're listening to yourself and you're doing your research. You come to find out that you're able to create a better environment for your client. What if you do have a trans client and they don't feel comfortable raising that? you're not listening very well, right? So that's really going to be your primary basis overall. And this is about a mindset. This CLE education, I said at the beginning, is about changing the mindset. What are the mechanisms, just the little mechanisms that we can use? So access, a presentation like this, you will have access to it. You can use it and modify it. Obviously, take my name off of it if you really change it up. But you, when I give this presentation, obviously, if I'm giving it to a group of all Black people, then my conversation is going to be radically different if I have that honor, which I have had on a number of occasions. So you're not going to be talking about the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues in the same way, right? That's standard. If you're talking to non-lawyers, but where can you give a presentation like this to teach about estate planning? Well, if you are involved in your church, synagogue, mosque, could be a religious affiliation, could be other parents, if in a parenting group of some kind, it could be your friends, but really looking at that access piece. And it sounds so simple, right? But we know as the way that wealth is handled in our country, in our society, and I would submit really in most societies, access to good, high quality legal information is going to be just access. Just knowing, hey, when grandma passes away, somebody better look into that house before the property taxes accumulate. Just that knowledge is something that you can make a tremendous difference as a practitioner. And if you are already an expert for our 14%, what can you do in the pro bono area? For any group, whether an expert in this or not, as you're moving into it, a lot of times in estate planning, we hear people say, I've heard it, and I've had this discussion in many different contexts. As Jennifer said, I'm passionate and I'll speak one-on-one, or I'll speak, in the hallway at a CLE or a conference for estate planning or whatever. And you'll hear people say, well, I don't recommend a trust. I have a rule of thumb, and people have different rules of thumb. Sometimes it's at least 100,000 in assets, at least $500,000 in assets, whatever it is. Well, or I would like, and it's going to vary by client, obviously, advice is particular to the client, but I would submit for consideration in terms of an estate planning strategy. When we're looking at these seem like simple things, but we know there's the rub, right? That's the rub. A trust in a situation, not a GRAT, not a NILIT. If you've never heard of these, you can Google them. There are different kinds of trusts and more sophisticated. If you're a legacy family, you're kind of in a different situation. But a nice, basic, revocable living trust can save all of those probate costs. It doesn't have to be an attorney. The trustee doesn't have to be an attorney. So to the extent that, you have any assets beyond the non-probate transfers. If you have a bank account, you're going to be looking at payable on death, your beneficiaries, if it's a retirement account, obviously a beneficiary deed for a house, a TOD on a vehicle. If you have anything beyond that, very quickly look at the trust, because I would almost submit, unless you're absolutely sure that everything is going to transfer in a non-probate way, I would submit that a trust is almost advisable in almost any case. But I grant you, there's a cost to it. You can lower your cost. As an attorney, maybe you're like, well, I have a minimum on my cases that I have to make. Otherwise, I can't cover my malpractice insurance. I can't cover my rent and so forth. Well, lower your profit, or drop your profit. Do that. These are things that we can do as practitioners to help provide that access. Am I saying do that, lose all your profit across your entire business? No, but could you do it one by one? Now, I want to loop back to the nonprofits. Okay, so a lot of times what you have within that are people who within that area are people who do enormous work to help the community that they are focused on, right? To help the disabled or help people of color or food justice, but they don't take care of themselves. So one thing you could do, and I would submit this is where that impact can really get amplified, because you're looking, hey, I'm going to do something pro bono, or I'm going to do something at a reduced rate. I want to have the greatest impact possible. If I'm trying to build a more just society, we'll go to your nonprofit people that are in your world and help them get their estate planning done so that they're taken care of in a period of infirmity, so that they are taken care of. And that's a way of, if you take care of if you help the helpers, right? I say that a little bit later. If you help the helpers, then you might have an even greater impact than you might otherwise have had. But one by one is certainly, or giving a presentation for a larger group at your mosque or your synagogue, your church, you might be able to help more people find out about those non-probate transfers that, unless it's a beneficiary deed, you don't even need an attorney for, but they don't know to get it. The public may not know to get it. So that's an important thing. The 3 columns approach, I don't know how you advise your clients, but what I like to do with folks I work with is ask them to create a snapshot of where they are right now. What do I own, and how is it going to transfer? Do I own a car? Do I own a house? Do I have a retirement account? Is it in this kind of instrument or that kind of instrument? Maybe it can go into trust, maybe it can't, maybe I need beneficiaries, but how is it going to transfer? How much do I owe, and how will it be paid? So do I have law school loans? Anybody here has already, paid theirs off within the first 5 years? Yay for you, right? But there's some of us that still are confronting that issue. And maybe for the rest of our lives. No, just kidding. So, do you have student loans? It's a huge issue. If it's private, they'll come after. If it's not, if it's public, then they're extinguished again pretty readily with a copy of the death certificate. But if that debt isn't extinguished upon death, well, what can I do with life insurance? Whole will build that kind of property, that build up that asset. But is term life insurance something that could really pay off my student loans, pay off what I have left on the car or the house, and pay for my funeral? Funeral expenses are a tremendous drain on the family at times. So and we all know that term life insurance, although it is something that needs to be maintained over time, you can afford that. I can't afford to pay off, call up Mohilo's my lender, and say, hey, what do I owe you in my student loans? And, oh, here's the check. I still can't afford that. I hope to do that at some point, but have that payoff amount. But I can afford 50, $100, whatever I can afford, whatever each one of us can look at, to cover that debt so that they don't come after my family, after my assets, anything that isn't transferring directly on non-probate transfer, which I can assure you is very little. But have that set up, because if you don't have a beneficiary deed on the house and you do have student loans and they're private and they're not extinguished upon death, they're going to come after the house, right? And that's going to be, again, and the asset's not going to evaporate. The value on that house isn't going to evaporate. But in terms of cycles, you have somebody who fought redlining, who may have fought who knows what discrimination and promotion issues in their whole lives, and they've got a house and they've pulled it out of the standard cycle in our economy, and boom, what happens? It's going to revert. The house isn't going to disappear, but it's going to go out. It's not going to go into the new cycle, into the family, and keeping it there. It's going to revert back in. And when you're talking about equity and by POC and so forth, that's a huge issue. I see another poll came up.
I'm going to leave this up for about 10 more seconds, Alex, and then I will show you the results.
60% of you provide. That's wonderful. And that's interesting too. You know, it's possible too that we're working for a firm that doesn't allow us to have other clients, and so that's something too. But there may be other ways to do that. So definitely here to finish up that 3 columns. We've got that amount of life insurance that you can afford, and that's something that is not in the public consciousness very much. We say, oh, life insurance, you see ads for it all the time, but connecting that dot for people, for those in our circle of family, friends, volunteer work, or professionals that may not know that and understand, hey, debt is going to suck out the value of this asset, or could suck it out. If your creditors go after your assets, this is a relatively inexpensive way of guarding a bit against that. So again, you know, we want to make sure that we're listening so that we're spotting those issues and providing competent advice. And I talked a little bit about this. I want to talk here language to avoid litigation. So, you know, this is Alaris. We're talking about this through obviously an organization, and that is so key. Those mechanisms are so key when you have an interorum. You know, not all of my colleagues include an interorum. And so since we have 14% that are going to recognize that, and some of you say interorum, and I pronounce it interorum. I don't know if that's the way that you pronounce it. I've heard it all different ways. But what you can do in some of your documents is put in a clause that says, basically, if you contest this, you lose your share. So if brother or sister or niece or nephew, they have a stake in the estate for some reason, well, if you try to jimmy with my paperwork, so I include those interorums in all of them. You're going to lose your stake. I didn't in the beginning, and I know that not all of us do, but I would submit language in your drafting language that avoids litigation. The other thing about litigation is put in there that mediation costs can come, your trustee or your power of attorney can hire professionals. Not just, you know, we think about, oh yeah, you know, a lot of times we put in language they can hire nurses or can hire, you know, that type of thing for medical needs. Well, that's great, but also include, you know, that if somebody wants to hire Alaris, and I have no affiliation with Alaris other than a friendship, as Jennifer said, with her and being asked to do this, but you want that to be crystal clear in your language that mediation, arbitration, and non-litigation, non-judicial avenues, and you know, maybe you want that to be your client wants that to be the pastor of their church. You know, ask Pastor so-and-so to sit in with the family and try to settle these differences, because we all know, I mean, there's so much family stuff that comes up with this that, you know, it's good to have lots of different mechanisms for it. Whether it's got to be one doctor or 2 doctors that certify something. Those are different ways. And I'm hoping that 14% those practitioners are going to say, what language do I put in to avoid litigation? And that way I'll get your ideas from the chat as well. Language that envisions family changes. So clients don't need to update documents so frequently. Something that I've been thinking about and doing is if you have a client who wants to put their child in place as power of attorney, for example, but they're not quite 18, or they don't want to do it. They are 18, but they don't want to do it until, let's say they're 30 or something. They think, you know, they think they're in their 20s in college. I don't want this. But you could put language in there that says, I mean, there's nothing wrong. That says, I name this person provided they are 30 years old, provided they are 18 or 25 or whatever it is. That's something that means the client doesn't, and I understand that part of our profit model is to bring the client in if they have anything, but if there's something like that going on that you're able to, you feel legitimately, and tell me in the Q&A if you don't think that's legit with the age, but I've talked to other practitioners and there seems to be no obstacle to that type of thing. but language that envisions those family changes, kids growing up, or maybe, having extra tiers, backups, if one of your powers of attorney, for example, your trustee is getting older. Well, sure, you could put in just two, but if you put in three tiers for those backups, then you might be able to save the client another round with you. And yes, that will be coming out of your pocket in that sense that they may or may not come back to you, but it will be something that can be considered to help your client, especially if you feel like that's a particular client that would benefit from that or part of your pro bono plan for the year.
Hey, Alex, I'm sorry to interrupt really fast. Your audio is, I don't know if something's touching your microphone, but it's like squishy. I don't know if it's in front of you or when you're moving, it's just kind of hard to hear you.
Oh gosh, has that been going on the whole presentation?
No, gosh, no. Just maybe the last minute or so.
Okay. All right. So right, I had just said that there might be language that we can put in that avoids coming back to the estate planner quite so quickly and can avoid litigation. So my suggestion for you, and we are coming up on the last few minutes here, drop anchor and take stock. You've got to make sure that your cultural competence exists at every point of client contact. Look at your marketing. Is everybody on your website of one color, or do you have just one person? As a Latina, that's something that I've looked at. I got rear-ended, and I don't do anything at all related to personal injury. So I was looking for somebody, and I saw these websites. I'm like, it's the year 20 whatever, and there's nobody on your staff, even though it's a fairly large firm, that's of color. That's something that I noticed. So think of it also in terms of referral. Am I going to refer? If I have a Latino client, I just referred yesterday, I don't do any immigration, and I get inquiries all the time about this area law or the other. I send those clients on to people that I think are culturally competent. If I feel that's kind of an area that might be a concern, I'm not going to send that business. I'm not getting anything off of it, but I'm not going to send it to somebody that I think is going to loop back to me and say, hey, your friend was totally offensive or whatever, right? If it's happening in your building, if people are harassing your clients or your staff in the elevator, maybe you're a big law and you have the top 4 floors or whatever, but there's people on the floors below and they're kind of unfriendly and having problems. And so your staff member comes in or your client comes in and they maybe just got yelled at in the parking lot or they had some negative experience. They might need a minute or two to compose themselves, right? So you want to create that environment and you want to be looking at your cultural competence at every point so that things can be reported. In terms of remedies, I've been talking throughout. Listen to your own resistance, listen to your clients. If there's something, Google it, this is something that we have the duty to maintain. It shouldn't be transactional, but honestly, the black dollar is worth an enormous amount of money nationally. The Latino dollar here in Missouri is $6 billion annually. I'm friends with Carlos Ramirez, the head of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in St. Louis, voted best in the nation in 2018. And I asked him, if you're talking to a bunch of attorneys, what would you tell them? The first time I gave the CLE, said I'm going to be speaking to a group of attorneys. He said, tell them we're underserved. The Latino dollar is worth $6 billion, and those are businesses, restaurants, upholstery, all across the state. Kansas City is obviously an even larger Latino community, and it shouldn't be transactional, but that's a reality, right? If none of those dollars are going into your pocket, is it maybe because that's your area of law is not relevant? Or is it maybe because your website is so darn unfriendly, right? Because you're not exhibiting any kind of cultural competence, or people come into your office, your staff members would never recommend your firm. Why is that? If your BIPOC staff won't ever recommend your firm, that's something to look into, right? And this doesn't mean run out to your next associate that you have sitting next to you and put pressure on them. The due diligence, please don't do that. Please do not go to the first person of color you encounter and ask them, educate me. This due diligence and responsibility, the buck stops with us, each one of us, to do our own education. Just being quite blunt. If you feel resistance to that, again, jot it down. I didn't appreciate it why Alex said that. And that's okay. That's okay. Feel it, sit with it, and learn. Learn. This might be an area of growth. There are plenty of associations. I've had them listed here on the slide for a bit that are providing training all over the state, no matter where you're from. And I didn't look at Arkansas or Kansas, but I know for a fact that they are there. They're happening there. Here in the region, right here in St. Louis, I do know we have a lot of people from St. Louis. We have professors that are doing this type of work. Fantastic. I had Professor Antoinette Lander was kind enough to give a presentation on colorism for some of us last year. And I got comments that it was the best CLE that people had ever been to and so forth. The only CLE I've ever been in that had spoken word poetry. It was really fantastic. White fragility here, that's a good one. I've been talking about white saviorism and these concepts. When you're feeling this resistance, and I'm going to tell you there's some controversy over this book because it's kind of perpetuating. There are people like Harvey, Norwood, and Lander who are writing and doing this type of work. I've thrown up some other names, Ron Norwood. I think we have somebody from Lewis Rice attending. You know, Ron Norwood, tremendous resource. I honestly think that somebody needs to write a book about the Norwoods and other power couples. Clinton, Reverends Clinton Stansel and his wife Christine is also a reverend, and the civil rights work that's actually being done, sometimes subtly and carefully in all different contexts, in the streets, protesting, and in law firms. And Amy Hunter is with in a large corporate environment now. These are local resources, and I know that you have them in your area as well. But you want to make sure that, you know, as you're looking at your resources, you are centering by POC voices, and that's the criticism of white fragility. I included, though, because Robin DiAngelo is not a person of color. I include it, though, because I'll tell you, I think it's a really useful concept. Just like Strand's article is not perfect, none of this is perfect. And in fact, Ibram Kendi starts his book out, How to Be an Anti-Racist, talking about his own racism that he had exhibited. He had internalized and expressed something. So spend some time sharing that anecdote. We're all learning, looping back to the beginning, know better, do better. And that fragility is an important concept. I'll tell you that I watched the inauguration on January 20th with bated breath, having arrived at that day, given the events of January 6th. And there were some comments about J-Lo's performance, the song that she sang, This Land Is Your Land, My Land. And I felt what I would consider, I was initially offended. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is fragility. And that was actually in a Latinx context. It was not my Northern European heritage from the Swedish and German side. I was feeling offended as a Latina. And I realized, so this concept is useful, but you can move through the feelings more quickly and get to the solution. What's the solution? What's the actual problem here? Is it because I'm offended? What is the actual solution? The new Jim Crow, if you're interested in the legal mass incarceration problems, there's movies, Ava DuVernay's 13th, the amendment, showing how the 13th Amendment is deeply problematic in perpetuating slavery, sharecropper wages, and links to the Fight for 15, the minimum wage now, and economically how that there's tons of materials out there. Can't put it in, obviously, all in one presentation. So reading materials, Harris Stowe is a local historically Black college university. That's a specific group. If you're not familiar with the acronym, you're welcome to Google that. And obviously a simple internet search, books to read about racism. I did want to come back to this Will the Dead Hands, A Social History of Wills, Trusts, and Inheritance Law that deals a bit with this. I confess to not having read it fully yet, but it does deal with this. And I hope to report back in my next presentation more about that book, so specifically for estate planning, again, like Strand's article, focusing on that inequality. Books to read about racism, your very basics. Your next steps, continue learning. Identify where your bias is affecting your law practice. Notice that I don't say if, I say where. because of that that iceberg situation that we have causing problems for all of us. Research those solutions, implement carefully, hire those experts there are people, if you're in your own law firm or big law, NCCJ St. Louis, for example, one of the organizations I mentioned, they provide great training in this for professional environments. Again, the responsibility is for each one of us to do our due diligence. To contact me, please feel free to do so at aj@aj.legal, and put it in your evaluation, get your feedback there. I'd be happy to talk more about any of this topics. So, all right. So we've got this situation with the distracting noise. And that was all that I see in the chat. Jennifer, do you see anything else?
I don't. I actually was just going to remind everyone, excuse me. Oh my goodness. I have a frog in my throat. If you want to ask a question, go ahead and post it now. We have a few more minutes. Alex, I do have a question, and you may have answered it throughout this. This has been fantastic, but it's something that I think about. And I think many of us probably on here do as well. It's the vernacular. So I feel like it's ever evolving. You mentioned that, and you've talked about, do your research, go to websites, but none of us want to offend anyone else, certainly. And so that's something that I think about. And again, it is evolving, but what would you suggest, or what's the best resource or the best way to make sure that we're using the proper terminology when it comes to all of this cultural competence?
Wow, well, that's a tough one. I mean, that's a tough one to have. There's no glossary that's released at the beginning of the year. January 1st every year. This is the glossary. I really think that in this area, to my opinion, the LGBTQI plus community has taught us quite well, and that's about the pronouns. My pronouns are she, hers, ella in Spanish. And you have to know that for an individual, for each individual, and that sounds quite onerous. That could sound quite onerous to some people, like, oh my God, I have to learn everything. Well, but for attorneys, we have the fantastic skill set that you would never, sure, if you have an individual come in who has children or not, doesn't have children, there may be similarities with your last client that you did their will, or maybe it was an immigration client, or maybe it was a criminal case, or yeah, there are similarities, but each case is particular. And so whether that system for yourself is like maybe your intake sheet, instead of saying male, female, like look at your intake sheet, and is that somewhere where you can have a non-binary additional notations? These are their pronouns. Add some of that in so that you can help yourself. I mean, gosh, I don't think there's anything there's no rule against putting a sticky note like, she prefers she, her pronouns are she, hers. And for a trans client, for example, any notation like that. It could be you just heard me say in this presentation, I prefer to identify as Latinx. And so maybe what you would do is jot down, if I were your client, oh, Alex prefers Latinx, or Jennifer, since we're friends, you might remember that. You might hear me say in a year, oh, I actually prefer Latina, because there's been growth on my part in that way. So part of it is understanding that this is about relationships and this is about individuals. And you may I'm talking about hair culture, for example, and other things. Well, this morning when I put on clothes, I think, like, are these earrings going to make me look more ethnic than not? That's something that is happening as an additional layer to being a woman in our society, and possibly thinking about makeup or heels or not. And so when you have that culture in which people can express themselves, I don't personally like larger, danglier earrings that might identify me in one way or another. When you have that environment, people can speak up and you can build that relationship and you can tell it. The other thing is, you just have to think of it as, we would never say with tax regulations, for example, well, a new one came out, I think it's going to directly affect my practice, or the Supreme Court, I'm in criminal and it's going to directly affect my practice. I'll read that a few months from now. No, you pull that and you read it. So it's part of it is also the mentality of I need to stay abreast of this. It is my job to stay more or less abreast and have that apology very firmly in hand. Just be very careful intentionally and sincerely and say, I'm really sorry. I used the incorrect pronoun. I'm really sorry. I know that you told me last time you identified as African American and not as Black, or Hispanic and not as Latinx, Latino. You prefer this. This is how your name is pronounced. Pop out a sticky note and say, this is the pronunciation, and put that on the top of the file. Have it, come up at before every meeting that you're going to talk to that particular client until the conclusion of your representation. So stay abreast of it. Does that answer the question, Jen?
Yes, and I know that that's not an easy one. I'm sorry, I didn't give you a softball, but no, that's great. I appreciate it. And I think, again, all of us are always trying to do better, and we do need to educate ourselves. And just listening to you, one small step, right? And there's so much more to do. So right. I appreciate that. We do have about a minute left. I don't see any questions. I just wondered if maybe this is a little bit off topic, but since we have a minute, if you might want to address, I know you've been actively involved with the Hispanic Bar. I'm currently the Women Lawyers Association president. Maybe offering that as not a solution per se, but just a way to branch out, to join these organizations, be involved. I know that the WLA and BAMSL YLD are going to be doing an ISMS CLE series coming up. So anyway, just there's different ways you can get involved and educate yourself. I didn't know if you had parting thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So we the diversity bar associations by POC have put on some great CLEs, if I say so myself, have been involved as the Hispanic Bar Association, the Asian American Bar Association, MABA, Missouri Asian American Bar Association, the SABA, the South Asian Bar Association of St. Louis, and the Mound City Bar Association of St. Louis. Fantastic presentations on racism, on colorism, on this topic of diversity and inclusion. As Jennifer mentioned, and that's what I was saying, it's out there. The information is yours for the taking. I think 20 years ago, 40 years ago, it might have been really difficult to say, hey, I'm an abolitionist. I want to help break down these barriers, and I really want to dig in. And there might not have been that many materials, and certainly now with the Zoom world, making it so easy, and the internet and social media. The Missouri Bar, I mentioned the special committee. We did, it's never perfect. It's never enough, but I do think we did good work. We have this law firm working groups report. We have a report for bar associations for law schools, and really a direction that the Missouri Bar, if I recall, it was voted on unanimously by the board, a direction that is consistent with the strategic planning that the Missouri Bar has been doing for the last 3-4 years. Don't quote me on that year. And so that's something that's available to you on the Missouri Bar's website if it might be a good place for you to start, as well as those other books and resources that I discussed earlier in the presentation.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that report. I'm actually on the Board of Governors, and yes, it's fantastic. So thank you. And we are basically out of time. So I just want to say, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. This was really interesting and insightful. Honestly, it was fantastic. And I hope that you maybe will agree to come back again. I'm not going to hold you to it, but it was really great. And then just a reminder to everyone who's listening, if they would like to get the presentation, they can email you or me, and we will gladly provide that. So
absolutely.
So thank you again, everyone.
Thank
go
you
out
for
and have
your
a safe
time.
day. Thank
Sorry
you.
about
Bye-bye.
the noise and the coughing, life.
Life, exactly. All right, well, take care. This will end the webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you.